My name's Carla Sabella, and I'm the founder and CEO of Ignite Your Learning. And I've been teaching for about 20 years. And hopefully some of the content I'm creating on here is really useful for what you're doing in your English studies. So one of the things I wanted to talk about quickly today was the difference between telling the story in an essay and not assuming that the marker has already read your text or, knows it, even though usually teachers do know it, unless maybe it's a related text they're not familiar with. They probably will know your text, but students kind of struggle between like how much plot should be put in an essay or how much information should be included from the actual text in the essay so that it makes sense for someone who, say, didn't know that particular text previously. Because, if I pick up a good essay, even if I haven't necessarily read that text before, I should still be able to get a pretty good idea of like what it's about and, what the key ideas are, etc. So the tip or the key is you need to tell the story or parts of the plot in relation to how they link to an actual idea that you were trying to prove. So I'm going to give you an example from Romeo and Juliet, because I think a lot of people have, done that one. So in Romeo and Juliet, it opens up with this conflict, right? So there's this conflict between the Capulets and the Montagues, and it's causing like a nationwide or a lot of social chaos, right? Because they've got all this brawling happening. So if you were telling the story in an essay, you would say Romeo and Juliet is about two families who are fighting with each other. Okay, that is clearly just telling the story. One of the biggest telltale signs of the fact that you're telling a story will be the words about. If you ever say the word about, like this is about, in your essay, you're probably telling the story. Okay, so that is a word to stay away from. So if you were going to be saying that particular detail, because it is important, but then, actually using it as part of your analysis correctly, what you would say is something like Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet illustrates how conflict between families or conflict in society can have negative consequences on society, shouldn't repeat society, and the individual. So, or if you were being a bit more specific, in the play, the conflict present between the Capulet and Montague families illustrates how conflict can have negative consequences in a society, let's say. So those are a little bit vague, but you can kind of see how I've mentioned the fact that there's a conflict between the two families, and then I've linked it back to a key idea, which is about how conflict can have a detrimental impact on society, and the individual, let's say. So hopefully there you can see there's a very clear distinction between telling the story and actually using elements of the story to analyze the points that you have. And so you should never be using parts of a plot that don't somehow link back to a point you're trying to make. Okay, if you've ever done that, you should be deleting that sentence. And then I suppose what happens is, sometimes you're in an essay and you don't know what to write. You run out of things to write about and you're like, I know this isn't long enough, I need more information. So what do you add, especially if you're going to be taking out, parts of the plot that you've described? So instead of having that, what you want to do is always have more examples. So if you've got more space, put more examples. Okay, make sure they're techniques, get a simile, get a metaphor, get a motif, like whatever it is that obviously you've studied in class and the techniques that you've done or you can find, that is what you want to add into flesh out your answers. That's the easiest way of going about it. There's no shortage of quotes ever. So that's what you want to add instead of having those plot details that you're recounting.